Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. The fog of war often blurs fact and fiction, creating legends of heroism that endure for generations. Many stories circulate about the Second World War, tales of nurses risking everything behind enemy lines. Yet, the most documented, dramatic, and consequential story of a nurse executed for saving soldiers does not come from the battlefields of 1944, but from the opening salvos of a conflict that would redefine warfare, the Great War. To understand the raw courage and the brutal calculus of military occupation, we must go back to 1914. Europe is a powder keg, and the spark has been lit. The German war machine, executing the ambitious Schlieffen Plan, smashes through the neutrality of Belgium. Their goal is a swift knockout blow against France, but Belgium, against all odds, resists. The resistance is fierce but ultimately futile. By late August, the German Imperial Army marches through Brussels. The city's vibrant life is extinguished, replaced by the grim reality of occupation. Checkpoints manned by soldiers in pickelhaube helmets appear on every corner. Curfews are imposed. The gray uniforms of the German military administration become a ubiquitous symbol of a new, harsh authority. It is in this crucible of fear and oppression that our story begins. In a quiet suburb, a British woman, a nurse, finds herself at the epicenter of the conflict. She is not a soldier, a spy, or a revolutionary. She is a healer. But in the moral labyrinth of war, she will be forced to make a choice that will pit her sworn duty to preserve life against the iron laws of her occupiers. A choice that will lead her to a lonely courtyard at dawn and transform her into an international symbol of sacrifice. Before the war, Edith Cavell was a figure of discipline, compassion, and professionalism. Born in 1865, the daughter of an English vicar, she was raised with a strong sense of duty and faith. She trained as a nurse at the London Hospital, a rigorous institution that forged some of the finest medical professionals of the era. By 1907, her reputation for excellence was such that she was recruited by Dr. Antoine Depige to be the matron of a new nursing school in Brussels, the Birkendale Medical Institute. In a time when nursing was still struggling for professional recognition, Cavell was a modernizer. She established a curriculum based on the Nightingale principles, training a new generation of Belgian nurses with an emphasis on hygiene, patient care, and strict protocol. Her institute thrived, becoming a beacon of modern medicine in the Belgian capital. When the war clouds gathered in the summer of 1914, she was visiting her widowed mother in England. Despite pleas to remain in the safety of Britain, her sense of duty was absolute. She stated simply, "At a time like this, I am more needed than ever." She returned to Brussels just before the German invasion. As the German army swept through the country, her institute was quickly transformed. It became a Red Cross hospital, its beds filled with the wounded from the initial, brutal fighting. In accordance with the Geneva Convention, Cavell and her staff treated all soldiers with impartiality. Wounded German soldiers received the same meticulous care as wounded Belgian and Allied soldiers. She was the calm, commanding presence in the center of the storm, her authority unquestioned, her dedication and inspiration to her frightened, overworked staff. She was simply Matron Cavell, a healer in a world consumed by killing, a bastion of humanity in a city that had fallen into darkness. The moral test came not in a hail of bullets, but in a quiet knock on the hospital door. In the autumn of 1914, two bedraggled figures appeared, seeking shelter. They were British soldiers, part of the British Expeditionary Force, cut off from their units during the chaotic retreat from the Battle of Mons. They had been hiding in the woods, aided by Belgian civilians, and were now desperate. For Cavell, this was the defining moment. Her duty as a Red Cross nurse was clear. She was to care for the sick and wounded, regardless of nationality. Aiding escaped combatants, however, was a different matter entirely. Under the German military code that now governed Brussels, harboring an enemy soldier was an act of treason, punishable by death. The German authorities had plastered the city with notices warning the population of the severe consequences. She stood at a precipice. To turn them away would be to condemn them to almost certain capture and life in a brutal prisoner-of-war camp. To help them would be to risk not only her own life, but the lives of her entire staff and the very existence of her hospital. The conflict was immense. Her British patriotism pulled her in one direction, her professional neutrality and the instinct for self-preservation pulled her in another. We can only imagine the silent debate that raged within her. Ultimately, her decision was guided by a principle that transcended military law and national allegiance, a profound sense of human duty. She could not, in good conscience, turn away men who had fought for her country and were now in desperate need. She admitted the two soldiers, hid them, and her hospital became the first link in a chain that would save hundreds. The decision was made. The die was cast. Edith Cavell, the meticulous matron, had just become a key operative in the Belgian resistance. What began with two soldiers soon escalated into a sophisticated and sprawling underground network. Word spread through clandestine channels that Nurse Cavell's clinic was a safe haven. Soon, a steady stream of French, Belgian, and British soldiers, along with young Belgian men eligible for military service, began to find their way to her door. Cavell became the linchpin of a complex escape line. She worked in concert with a diverse group of patriots, including Prince Reginald de Croix and Belgian architect Philippe Bock. The operation required immense logistical coordination. Her hospital on the Rue de la Culture served as a central clearinghouse. Soldiers would be given civilian clothes, often smuggled into the hospital in laundry baskets. They were fed, their injuries tended to, and they were given a place to hide in the sprawling facility. The next and most dangerous step was escape. The ultimate goal was to reach neutral Holland, a perilous journey of over 100 miles through occupied territory patrolled by German soldiers. The network arranged for guides, brave locals who knew the back roads and forests, to lead small groups of men toward the Dutch frontier. Forged identification papers and travel permits were created, a high-stakes craft where a single mistake could be fatal. Money was essential to the operation, needed to bribe officials, pay for food, and fund the guides. Cavell used her own savings and solicited funds from a clandestine patriotic group to keep the pipeline moving. It's estimated that over 200 Allied soldiers and military-age civilians successfully escaped through this network. The sheer scale and success of the operation, run by a nurse and a small band of civilians under the nose of the German military, was extraordinary. It was a silent, secret war fought not with guns, but with whispers, false documents, and incredible courage. An operation of this size could not go unnoticed forever. The German occupation authorities, particularly the Geheime Feldpolizei, or secret military police, were highly efficient and deeply paranoid. The constant drain of potential prisoners and the flow of men who would inevitably rejoin the Allied armies was a serious concern. They knew an escape line was operating in Brussels, and they were determined to smash it. The Germans began to close the net. They tightened controls at the Dutch border, increasing patrols and scrutinizing travel documents with greater care. Within Brussels, a web of informers was cultivated. Belgians were offered money or leniency for information on resistance activities. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion. A wrong word to a neighbor or a careless comment in a cafe could lead to a midnight arrest. The German secret police employed more insidious tactics as well. They began to infiltrate the network with agents posing as escaped Allied airmen or soldiers. These men would present themselves at known safe houses, seeking help, all the while gathering names, locations, and operational details. One such collaborator, Georges Gaston Quinn, a Frenchman who had been imprisoned for fraudulent activities, was released by the Germans on the condition that he would infiltrate the Brussels network. He successfully worked his way into the confidence of several key members of the escape line. The danger was now palpable. Cavell and her associates knew they were being watched. Friends warned her to be more discreet, to perhaps even cease her activities. But she refused. As long as soldiers came to her for help, she would provide it. The tension in the hospital was unbearable. Every new face was a potential threat. Every knock at the door could be the Feldpolizei. The quiet corridors of the Birkendale Institute, once a place of healing, now felt like the front line of a secret war. The end came on August 5, 1915. German authorities, armed with information from collaborators like Quinn, moved to decapitate the network. 2 German officers arrived at the Birkendale Institute and asked to see the matron. Edith Cavell met them with her characteristic composure. They began to question her, and she denied any involvement. They searched the hospital but found no incriminating evidence. The soldiers who had been hiding there had already been moved on. Despite the lack of physical proof, they had enough testimony from captured guides and infiltrators. They arrested her and took her to the St. Gilles prison. For the next 10 weeks, she was held in solitary confinement. She was interrogated repeatedly by German officials. For the first few weeks, she admitted nothing, skillfully deflecting their questions. But the interrogators were patient and methodical. They presented her with evidence, with confessions from other captured members of the network. They likely told her, falsely, that others had already implicated her fully. Cavell, a woman with a deeply ingrained sense of honor and truthfulness, was not equipped for this kind of psychological warfare. Believing that the entire operation had been exposed, she made a fateful decision. She confessed to everything. She detailed her role in housing and financing the escape of approximately 200 men. In her mind, lying was dishonorable. She had done what she believed to be right, and she would not deny it. This confession, given without legal counsel, was a death warrant. It provided her German prosecutors with precisely what they needed: a direct admission of guilt for the crime of conducting soldiers to the enemy, a capital offense under paragraph 58 of the German military code. Her honesty, a core tenet of her character, had sealed her fate. The trial, when it came, was a mere formality. On October 7, 1915, Edith Cavell and 34 other members of the network were brought before a German military court-martial in Brussels. The proceedings were conducted entirely in German, a language Cavell did not fully understand. Her court-appointed lawyer was given little time to prepare a defense. The prosecution's case was built almost entirely on her own confession. She did not contest the facts. When asked if she had helped the soldiers, she answered truthfully. When asked if she knew she was breaking German military law, she acknowledged that she did. Her defense argued for clemency, citing her humanitarian work in caring for German soldiers. They argued she had acted out of compassion, not malice, but the court was unmoved. The charge was not espionage, but the far more serious wartime offense of aiding the enemy's military forces. As the trial unfolded, neutral diplomats in Brussels began a frantic effort to save her. Brand Whitlock, the American minister to Belgium, and the Marquis de Villalabar, the Spanish minister, made urgent appeals to the German military governor, Baron von der Lancken. They argued that executing a woman, a nurse celebrated for her humanitarian work, would be a public relations disaster for Germany. They pleaded that her life be spared, that a prison sentence would be sufficient punishment. The German military establishment, however, was determined to make an example of her. They believed the escape network had done significant damage to their war effort, and that a harsh sentence was necessary to deter further resistance. They saw Cavell not as a compassionate nurse, but as a key figure in a military operation against them. On October 11th, the verdict was delivered. Edith Cavell was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. The sentence was to be carried out the very next morning. The news of the sentence and its imminent execution sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community. Whitlock and Villalabar launched a final, desperate, late-night appeal, but the German officials were resolute. The decision was final. In her cell at St. Gilles prison, Edith Cavell prepared to die. She was granted a final visit from the Anglican chaplain, Reverend Sterling Gahan. He found her calm and resigned, a stark contrast to the frantic diplomats trying to save her. She spent her final hours not in fear or anger, but in quiet reflection and prayer. She wrote letters to her nurses, urging them to carry on their work. With Reverend Gahan, she took Holy Communion. It was during this final conversation that she spoke the words for which she would be most remembered. She told him that she had no fear or shrinking. She had seen death so often that it was not strange or fearful to her. She wanted her friends to know that she willingly gave her life for her country. But then she added a reflection that transcended nationalism, a statement of profound and enduring wisdom. She said, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone." In this final testament, she separated her personal duty from the jingoism and hatred that the war had unleashed across Europe. She was at peace with her actions and with her fate. She was led from her cell in the pre-dawn darkness. She had spent her life saving lives, and now she faced her own end with a courage and clarity of spirit that left a lasting impression on the German chaplain who accompanied her. She was not a soldier, but on that cold October morning, she displayed a fortitude that would rival any veteran of the trenches. Her final hours were not a portrait of defiance, but of a quiet, unshakable grace. At 7 a.m. on October 12, 1915, Edith Cavell and fellow conspirator Philippe Bock were led into the Tour National, the National Rifle Range on the outskirts of Brussels. The morning was cold and gray. A German firing squad of 16 soldiers was assembled. According to witnesses, she walked calmly to the post, refusing a blindfold. The order was given. A volley of rifle fire echoed in the morning air, and Edith Cavell fell. Her death was meant to be a grim warning, a demonstration of the price of defiance. But the German authorities had profoundly miscalculated the global reaction. They had executed a woman, a nurse, whose life was dedicated to healing. The act was seen not as a legitimate exercise of military justice, but as an act of barbarism. When the news reached London, Paris, and Washington, it caused an immediate and explosive wave of outrage. Newspapers ran headlines decrying the murder of Edith Cavell. The story was a propaganda gift for the Allies. She was instantly transformed from a nurse into a holy martyr, a symbol of German brutality and Allied righteousness. Her final words, "Patriotism is not enough," were emblazoned on posters. Her image was used on recruitment posters across the British Empire, shaming men into enlisting with the question, "Did you do your bit?" The British government claimed that her execution led to a doubling of recruitment numbers in the weeks that followed. The German government attempted to justify their actions, releasing statements emphasizing that she had been convicted in a fair trial for a serious military offense. But their explanations were drowned out by the chorus of international condemnation. The execution did more damage to Germany's reputation than a lost battle. It galvanized public opinion, hardened anti-German sentiment in neutral countries like the United States, and provided the Allies with a powerful moral weapon that they would use for the remainder of the war. The legacy of Edith Cavell extends far beyond the propaganda posters of the First World War. After the armistice in 1918, her body was exhumed from the prison grounds in Belgium. She was given a state funeral at Westminster Abbey, an honor reserved for the nation's most revered figures, before being reburied at Norwich Cathedral in her home county. Monuments were erected in her honor in London, Paris, and Brussels, cementing her status as an international icon of sacrifice. Her story served as a powerful cautionary tale. The global outrage over her execution set a precedent. While nurses would continue to serve, be captured, and show immense bravery in World War II, the summary execution of a female medical professional for aiding combatants was an atrocity few commanders were willing to repeat. Consider the case of Lieutenant Reba Whittle, an American flight nurse whose medical evacuation plane was shot down over Germany in September 1944. She was the only American female service member to become a prisoner of war in the European theater. She was held in German POW hospitals, and while conditions were difficult, she was treated as a prisoner of war, not a spy. After 4 months, she was repatriated, her status as a non-combatant medical professional ultimately respected by her captors. Cavell's fate highlighted a gray area in the laws of war, and her death ensured it would be a line that was rarely crossed again. Today, she is remembered not just as a patriot, but as a humanitarian. Her final words, "Patriotism is not enough," have become an anthem for international organizations like the Red Cross, a reminder that humanity must always rise above national conflict. She was a nurse who did her duty, not just to her country, but to her conscience. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.